The year is approximately 2334 BCE. The Sumerian world operates as a constellation of independent city-states, each orbiting its own divine patron, each claiming dominion over the cosmic order. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, these are not merely cities. They are theological universes unto themselves, governed by priest-kings who mediate between heaven and earth. Their conflicts are ritualized, their wars constrained by tradition and the limits of Bronze Age logistics. Into this fragmented landscape steps a figure whose origins remain deliberately obscured by legend. Sargon of Akkad, his name Sharu-kin, means the king is legitimate. The very nomenclature suggests a man who must assert his right to rule. He is cupbearer to Yurzababa, king of Kish, a position of trust but not of sovereignty. What transforms this court functionary into the architect of history's first multi-ethnic empire is not recorded in the surviving cuneiform tablets. What we possess instead is the aftermath geographic explosion of Akkadian power that shatters the millennia-old Sumerian political order. Sargon's challenge is unprecedented in scope. He does not seek to become another city-state ruler in the traditional mold. He envisions something the ancient Near East has never witnessed. A centralized administration that transcends ethnic boundaries, that imposes a single language of governance across diverse populations, that replaces the divine right of local temples with the absolute authority of a king who claims universal mandate. The geopolitical canvas before him is both opportunity and obstacle. Mesopotamia in the mid-24th century BCE is wealthy beyond measure. The alluvial plains between the Tigris and Euphrates produce agricultural surpluses that fund monumental architecture, complex bureaucracies, and professional military forces. The cities control the arterial trade routes connecting the Persian Gulf with Anatolia, the Zagros Mountains with the Levanten coast. Whoever commands these cities commands the economic nervous system of the known world. But these city-states are also formidable. They possess sophisticated fortification systems, mud brick walls of immense thickness, reinforced with bitumen, designed to withstand siege warfare that can extend across seasons. Their armies, though small by later imperial standards, are professional forces built around shock infantry armed with bronze-tipped spears, copper axes, and rectangular shields. Their commanders understand the tactical geometry of Mesopotamian warfare, the use of canals as defensive barriers, the positioning of reserve forces on Tel's artificial mounds that provide elevated firing positions, the coordination of chariots as mobile command platforms. Sargon's strategy must therefore operate on multiple registers simultaneously. Militarily, he must develop a force capable of achieving decisive battlefield victory against opponents who possess equivalent technology and superior fortifications. Politically, he must fracture the alliance structures that bind these cities together in confederations of mutual defense. Ideologically, he must construct a legitimizing narrative that allows defeated populations to accept Akkadian overlordship without requiring the constant suppression of revolt. Logistically, he must sustain military campaigns across distances and durations that exceed any previous Mesopotamian operation. The stakes are existential. Failure means not merely the defeat of Sargon personally, but the likely extinction of Akkad itself. The city-states do not take kindly to upstarts. A defeated Sargon would be displayed in the temples of his enemies, his dynasty erased, his capital razed. Success, however, opens a pathway to a form of power that has no precedent. The creation of an empire-political structure that homogenizes diverse populations under a single administrative apparatus, that extracts tribute from conquered territories to fund further expansion, that replaces the horizontal network of independent cities with a vertical hierarchy radiating from a single center. This is the design of Sargon's conflict. It is not a war of conquest in the traditional sense, where one city defeats another to settle a boundary dispute or seize a contested irrigation canal. It is a war of systemic transformation, an attempt to reorganize the fundamental political architecture of civilization itself. To understand what Sargon destroys, we must first understand what exists. The Sumerian city-state system in 2334 BCE represents the culmination of nearly a millennium of political evolution. These are not primitive settlements. They are sophisticated urban centers, some housing populations of 40,000 or more, sustained by irrigation agriculture that requires constant collective labor and centralized coordination. Each city-state is governed by an Ensia priest-king who serves as the earthly representative of the city's patron deity. The temple is not merely a religious institution. It is the economic and administrative heart of the polity. The temple owns vast tracts of agricultural land, employs thousands of workers in specialized crafts, maintains granaries that serve as both food reserves and proto-banking institutions. The Ensi's legitimacy derives not from military prowess or hereditary succession, but from his ability to maintain cosmic order through proper ritual observance and effective management of the temple economy. This system has inherent structural tensions. The cities compete for resources, particularly water rights, as the Euphrates and Tigris rivers shift their courses over time, creating winners and losers among the communities that depend on their flow. Border wars are endemic, but these conflicts remain limited. Cities are rarely, if ever, completely destroyed. Defeated Ensis are replaced, tribute is extracted, but the fundamental sovereignty of the defeated city-state endures. The temples remain inviolate, the social structure persists. By the time Sargon emerges, this system shows signs of instability. Lugalzagasi, the Ensi of Umma, has already begun to consolidate power on an unprecedented scale. He has conquered Lagash, Ur, and Uruk, claiming dominion over the entirety of Sumer. He styles himself as King of the Land, a title that suggests ambitions beyond traditional city-state boundaries. The Sumerian chronicles describe him as a ruler who made the land of Sumer obedient and who reached from the lower sea to the upper sea, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Lugalzagesi's brief hegemony demonstrates both the possibility and the fragility of greater-than city-state political organization. He proves that a single ruler can, through military force and diplomatic maneuvering, establish dominance over multiple cities. But his empire is personal, not institutional. It relies on his charisma, his military success, his ability to distribute spoils to loyal subordinates. It has no bureaucratic infrastructure capable of surviving his death or defeat. Sargon will study this model carefully. He will learn from both its successes and its failures. Sargon's military innovations are as much organizational as technological. The armies of the Sumerian city-states are built around the mushlam, the elite infantry formations that fight in dense formations with spear and shield. These units are effective in set-piece battles fought on open terrain where discipline and cohesion determine victory. But they are less adaptable to rapid maneuver, to extended campaigns, to the kind of sustained operational tempo that conquest requires. Sargon creates something different. His forces, our larger ancient sources claim he maintains a standing army of 5,400 men, an enormous number for this era. Whether this figure is accurate or represents later exaggeration, the implication is clear. Sargon supports a permanent military establishment that does not dissolve after each campaign season. This requires a logistical apparatus capable of supplying troops across multiple years, a taxation system robust enough to fund professional soldiers, and a command structure that can maintain discipline and cohesion across long periods of active service. The composition of this army reflects Sargon's strategic requirements. The core remains heavy infantry spearmen equipped with bronze weapons, leather armor reinforced with copper studs, and large rectangular shields that can interlock to form a defensive wall. But Sargon integrates greater numbers of light infantry, archers, slingers, and javelin throwers who can skirmish at range, harass enemy formations, and exploit gaps in their defensive lines. More significantly, Sargon emphasizes mobility. His forces include substantial numbers of chariots, not the heavy, four-wheeled platforms of earlier periods, but lighter, two-wheeled vehicles drawn by onagers or early domesticated horses. These chariots do not function as shock cavalry. The technology does not yet exist for mounted archery or lance charges. Instead, they serve as mobile firing platforms for elite archers, and as rapid transport for commanders who need to reposition during battle. The tactical doctrine that emerges from this force structure is aggressive and decisive. Sargon does not fight defensive wars. He does not sit behind fortifications and wait for enemies to exhaust themselves. He seeks out enemy armies in the field, forces them into battle, and attempts to achieve complete destruction of their military capacity in a single engagement. This approach requires superior logistics, the ability to supply an army on the move, to maintain operational tempo despite the friction of campaign, to coordinate movements across multiple columns. It also requires intelligence. Sargon invests heavily in reconnaissance, in the cultivation of informants within enemy cities, in the mapping of terrain and the identification of water sources. His campaigns are not wild gambits. They are calculated operations based on detailed understanding of enemy capabilities and vulnerabilities. The weaponry of Sargon's army represents the cutting edge of Bronze Age military technology. Bronze remains expensive, an alloy of copper and tin, with the tin sourced from distant trade networks. Not every soldier carries a bronze-tipped spear. Many still rely on hardwood points or obsidian blades. But the elite units, the Ashaku who form Sargon's shock troops, are equipped with the finest weapons available: bronze axes capable of penetrating copper-reinforced armor, bronze-tipped arrows that can pierce shields at range, and bronze daggers for close-quarters combat. Equally important is the bow. Sargon's archers use composite bows weapons constructed from multiple layers of wood, horn, and sinew, glued together and shaped to create enormous draw weight and range. These bows can kill at distances exceeding 200 meters, far beyond the effective range of spears or javelins. They give Sargon's forces a significant standoff advantage, allowing them to inflict casualties before closing to melee range. The psychological dimension of this military instrument cannot be overlooked. Sargon cultivates an aura of invincibility. His inscriptions, carved into stone stele and placed in conquered cities, describe him as the king who defeated the four quarters of the world, the king to whom Enlil gave no rival. This is more than propaganda. It is an integral component of his strategic approach. Enemies who believe defeat is inevitable are more likely to surrender without resistance. Cities that calculate the cost of resistance against the certainty of Akkadian victory may choose accommodation. Sargon understands that military conquest alone cannot sustain an empire. The Sumerian city-states have deep roots, ancient traditions, powerful priesthoods that command popular loyalty. To rule effectively, Sargon must do more than defeat armies. He must integrate conquered populations into a new political order that makes resistance seem futile and collaboration seem profitable. His administrative strategy is elegant in its simplicity. He does not attempt to abolish the city-states or eliminate their distinctive identities. Instead, he superimposes a layer of Akkadian authority over existing structures. Local enses remain in place, continue to govern their cities, maintain their temples, but now they do so as subordinates to Sargon, who appoints Akkadian governors to oversee the loyalty and tribute obligations of each conquered territory. This system requires personnel. Sargon draws on multiple sources. Some administrators are Akkadians, loyal to Sargon personally, who serve as his eyes and ears in potentially rebellious cities. Others are local elites who calculate that collaboration offers better prospects than resistance. Still others are members of Sargon's extended family. His daughter Enheduanna, for example, is installed as High Priestess of the moon god Nanna at Yor, a position that gives Akkadian authority religious legitimacy in one of Sumer's most important cities. The economic dimension of empire is equally critical. Sargon does not merely extract tribute. He reorganizes trade networks to funnel resources toward Akkad. He protects merchants, guaranteeing safe passage for caravans that pay tolls to Akkadian authorities. The result is a virtuous cycle. Increased trade generates revenue that funds military expansion, which in turn brings more trade routes under Akkadian control. Language serves as another instrument of integration. Akkadian, a Semitic language distinct from Sumerian, becomes the lingua franca of administration. Over time, this linguistic dominance erodes the separateness of Sumerian identity, making the subject populations incrementally more integrated into Akkadian political culture. His solution is strategic positioning. He maintains garrisons in key locations, ensures that no conquered city can easily form a coalition with its neighbors, and responds to dissent with overwhelming and exemplary violence. The grand strategic vision then is one of layered control, military dominance, administrative integration, economic reorganization, and cultural assimilation, all working in concert to transform the Mesopotamian world from a network of independent cities into a hierarchical empire radiating from Akkad. This is the design Sargon brings to the battlefield. Now comes the test of execution. Ancient sources, particularly the Sumerian king list and later Assyrian chronicles that preserve fragments of Akkadian tradition, speak of an army that ate daily before him, a standing force that does not disperse to harvest fields or tend livestock, but remains under arms throughout the campaign season and beyond. The core of this army is the Erenma, the Great Army, organized into units that reflect both tactical function and social hierarchy. These warriors are equipped with the finest weapons available: bronze spearheads that can penetrate layered armor, copper axes with reinforced hafts, they wear helmets, conical copper shells that deflect glancing blows, and body armor consisting of leather cuirasses reinforced with overlapping copper plates. Below the elite guard are the Erendam, the recruited army, heavy infantry drawn from Akkad citizenry and from allied Semitic tribes. These soldiers form the phalanx formations that will bear the brunt of close combat. They carry spears between 2 and 3 meters in length, designed for thrusting rather than throwing. Their shields are rectangular, constructed from woven reeds covered with leather, tall enough to protect from throat to knee when grounded. In formation, these shields interlock, creating a wall that enemy infantry must break through to reach the Akkadian line. The missile troops constitute a significant portion of Sargon's order of battle. The T-dun, or arrow shooters, use composite bows constructed from layers of wood, sinew, and horn. The manufacturing process for these weapons is elaborate. The core is carved from flexible wood. The back is reinforced with sinew to resist tension, and the belly is reinforced with horn to resist compression. The result is a bow that stores enormous energy, releasing arrows with sufficient force to penetrate shields at ranges exceeding 150 meters. The slingers, often overlooked in discussions of ancient warfare, form another critical component. These soldiers carry leather slings capable of hurling lead or stone projectiles at velocities that rival arrows. A skilled slinger can achieve accuracy at 70 meters and effective harassment fire at twice that distance. The advantage of slingers is logistical. Ammunition is abundant and requires no specialized manufacture. Where an archer must husband his arrows carefully, a slinger can gather stones from any riverbed or field. Sargon's chariots represent the era's equivalent of armored mobility. Each vehicle carries a crew of 2, a driver and a warrior. The driver controls a pair of onager's wild asses that have been partially domesticated through selective breeding. The warrior is typically an archer or a spearman who dismounts to fight once the chariot reaches the battle site. These chariots are not shock weapons. They cannot charge formed infantry with any hope of breaking through. Instead, they provide rapid transport across the battlefield, allow commanders to observe and react to tactical developments, and offer a platform for mobile archery that can harass enemy flanks. The total strength of Sargon's expeditionary force is difficult to establish with precision. The figure of 5,400 men appears in multiple sources, but whether this represents the full army or only the elite professional corps remains debated. A reasonable estimate for a major campaign might place Sargon's field army at between 8 and 12,000 combatants, a massive force by the standards of Mesopotamian warfare. This does not include the logistical tail: servants, laborers who carry supplies, engineers who manage siegecraft, scribes who record the campaign's progress. Against Sargon stands the accumulated military power of the Sumerian city-states. These are not primitive forces. They represent the culmination of centuries of military evolution, refined through constant intercity warfare. But they are also conservative forces, wedded to tactical doctrines that have proven effective in the ritualized conflicts between city-states but may not suffice against Sargon's aggressive operational art. The Sumerian military system is built around the NC's personal retinue professional soldiers who owe their loyalty directly to the ruler and who train continuously in the martial arts. These warriors form the mushlam, the terrifying or elite formations that anchor the battle line. They are equipped similarly to Sargon's heavy infantry: spears, shields, helmets, and body armor. The quality of their weaponry varies by city. Wealthy Ur can equip its forces with bronze more liberally than smaller cities like Adab or Shurapak. The bulk of Sumerian armies consists of levy, infantry farmers, and craftsmen who are obligated to serve when war threatens. These soldiers bring their own weapons, which are often of inferior quality: hardwood spears without bronze tips, shields constructed from reeds without leather covering, minimal armor. They are brave but lack the training and cohesion of professional forces. In battle, they serve primarily to add mass to the formation, to create the impression of numerical superiority that might intimidate enemies into withdrawal. Sumerian tactical doctrine emphasizes defensive strength. Armies typically take position with their flanks anchored on terrain features canals, irrigation ditches, tells that prevent envelopment. The heavy infantry forms in deep ranks, presenting an unbroken shield wall. Archers are positioned behind this wall, shooting over the heads of the front ranks. The goal is to create a formation so solid that enemy attacks break against it like waves against stone. This approach has proven effective in Sumerian intercity warfare, where battles are often decided by attrition rather than maneuver. Two armies form up, exchange missile fire, probe for weaknesses, and eventually one side's morale breaks. The victor pursues briefly, inflicts modest casualties, and accepts the defeated city's surrender. The system functions because all parties share an understanding of the limited aims of war. Sargon will shatter this understanding. The greatest immediate threat to Sargon's ambitions is the NC of Umma, who has already established hegemony over much of Sumer. Lugal-Zagassi commands the combined forces of Uruk, Ur, Larsa, and the other cities he has brought under his authority. His army likely numbers in the tens of thousands when fully mobilized, far larger than anything Sargon can field. But size is not the only variable. Lugal-Zagessi's forces are a coalition, not a unified command structure. The contingents from each city maintain their own officers, their own standards, their own tactical preferences. Coordination is difficult. Logistics are decentralized. The army moves at the pace of its slowest element. Moreover, Lugal-Zagessi's control is recent and potentially fragile. The cities he rules have their own traditions, their own ambitions. They obey him because he has demonstrated military success, but their loyalty is contingent. A significant defeat could fracture the coalition, as cities calculate that submission to Sargon offers better terms than continued subordination to a weakened Lugal-Zagassi. One critical challenge Sargon faces is that his enemies possess essentially equivalent military technology. Bronze weapons, composite bows, chariots, professional infantry, the Sumerian cities have access to all of these. Sargon enjoys no gunpowder revolution, no steel against bronze, no technological trump card that guarantees battlefield superiority. His advantages are subtler. First, unity of command. Sargon's army answers to a single strategic vision, can execute complex maneuvers without the need for constant negotiation between coalition partners. Second, superior logistics. The Akkadian logistical system, built around centralized granaries and a corps of professional supply officers, can sustain operations over longer distances and durations than the ad hoc arrangements of Sumerian coalitions. Third, tactical flexibility. Sargon's integration of multiple arms, heavy infantry, light infantry, archers, chariots allows him to adapt to battlefield conditions rather than relying on a single tactical approach. Fourth, and perhaps most important, operational tempo. Sargon does not give enemies time to prepare, to concentrate their forces, to choose advantageous terrain. He strikes quickly, forces battle before coalitions can fully form, and exploits victory immediately rather than pausing to negotiate terms. This relentless pace wears down opponents psychologically as well as physically. No discussion of Mesopotamian warfare can ignore the fortifications. The cities of Sumer are not open settlements. They are walled fortresses designed to withstand siege warfare that can extend across seasons or even years. The walls of a major Sumerian city are engineering marvels. They rise 6 to 8 meters high, constructed from sun-baked mud brick that has been reinforced with bitumen, a naturally occurring petroleum product that serves as both waterproofing and structural reinforcement. The walls are thick, often 10 meters or more at the base, creating platforms wide enough for defenders to move along the parapet. And for the positioning of missile troops, towers punctuate the walls at regular intervals, projecting outward to allow enfilade fire along the wall's face. Gates are the weakest points, reinforced with massive wooden beams and protected by killing zones where attackers must funnel into narrow approaches under concentrated missile fire. Behind the walls, the city's population can endure siege through stored grain in temple granaries, water from wells that tap into underground aquifers, and the production of weapons and ammunition by craftsmen organized in temple workshops. Siegecraft in this era is primitive compared to later ages. Battering rams exist but are cumbersome and vulnerable to defensive countermeasures, incendiary projectiles, heavy stones dropped from above, sorties by defenders. Siege towers and catapults have not yet been invented. Digging tunnels under walls to collapse them is difficult in the waterlogged soil of Mesopotamia, where underground chambers quickly flood. The primary siege method is blockade. Surround the city, cut off supplies, and wait for starvation to force surrender. But blockades require large forces to maintain, create logistical burdens on the besieging army, and offer time for relief forces to arrive. Sargon will need to find ways to breach or bypass these fortifications if he is to achieve the rapid conquest his strategy requires. Behind the tactical formations and the strategic calculations stand the men who must execute Sargon's vision. These are not automatons. They are farmers' sons, craftsmen, tribesmen drawn from the Syrian desert, Akkadian citizens who believe in their king's divine mandate. They march because Sargon commands, but also because war offers opportunities for plunder, for social advancement, for glory that might otherwise remain forever out of reach. The physical demands of campaign are brutal. Soldiers march in the Mesopotamian heat, where summer temperatures exceed 40 degrees Celsius. They carry equipment weighing 20 kilograms or more, weapons, armor, supplies. Water is scarce outside the immediate vicinity of rivers. Disease is endemic. Dysentery, malaria, and infected wounds kill as many soldiers as combat. Discipline is maintained through a combination of esprit de corps, religious ideology, and fear. Akkadian soldiers believe they fight at the command of the gods, that Sargon is the chosen instrument of divine will. This conviction sustains morale through hardship. But discipline is also enforced by officers who have the authority to execute deserters, to punish cowardice, to distribute or withhold plunder based on performance. The logistics of feeding an army of 10,000 men are staggering. Each soldier requires approximately 1 kilogram of grain per day, a total of 10 metric tons daily for the army as a whole. This grain must be ground into flour, baked into bread, distributed to units in the field. Water consumption is even higher. In the Mesopotamian heat, soldiers require 4 to 6 liters per day, plus water for draft animals. An army must camp near rivers or wells, or must carry water in clay jars and leather skins, a burden that limits operational range. Sargon's logistical corps includes bakers, butchers, water carriers, and herders who manage the livestock that accompanies the army. There are also craftsmen who repair weapons and armor, healers who tend to the wounded, and scribes who record expenditures and maintain the administrative apparatus that keeps supplies flowing from Akkad to the field. This is the intricate machinery Sargon must keep functioning if his conquests are to succeed. Now we turn to the campaigns themselves, to the moment when design meets reality, when the order of battle is tested by the friction of war. The campaign opens not with a single climactic battle, but with a calculated sequence of smaller operations designed to isolate, Lugalzagasi, and demonstrate Akkadian power to wavering cities. Sargon understands that he cannot immediately challenge the full might of the Sumerian coalition. Instead, he must fracture it, peeling away cities one by one, forcing Lugalzagasi to respond on ground of Akkadian choosing. The first target is Kish. Sargon's former master Yorzababa still rules this city. The symbolic value of conquering Kish is immense. It is one of the oldest cities in Mesopotamia, a place that claims to have received kingship directly from the gods after the Great Flood. To defeat Kish is to appropriate its legitimacy, but Kish also presents tactical advantages. It sits astride the Euphrates, controlling river traffic between the northern plains and the southern cities. Its conquest would secure Sargon's supply lines and deny Lugalzagasi access to northern resources. Sargon's approach is deliberate. He marched south with his full army, making no attempt at stealth. He wants Yorzababa to know he is coming, wants the king of Kish to have time to muster his forces and meet Sargon in the field. A siege would be costly and time-consuming. A field battle offers the possibility of decisive resolution. The armies meet on the plain north of Kish, within sight of the city's walls. Yorzababa has assembled perhaps 4,000 soldiers, the levy of Kish plus mercenaries hired from neighboring cities. His formation is traditional, a center of heavy infantry flanked by smaller contingents of archers, with chariots held in reserve. Sargon's approach is anything but traditional. He divides his army into 3 badas. The center, under his direct command, advances toward the Kish line in standard fashion. But the flanks, stronger than Yorzababa's, push forward aggressively, not to envelope but to draw out the Kish reserves. Yorzababa takes the bait. He commits his chariots to shore up his right flank, which appears on the verge of collapse under Akkadian pressure. The moment the chariots move, Sargon signals his archers forward. They have been held back, concealed behind the Akkadian center. Now they surge ahead, forming a crescent that enfilades the Kish center from both sides. The effect is devastating. Arrows pour into the Kish formation from angles their shields cannot cover. Men fall, the neat ranks dissolve, and the psychological cohesion that holds an ancient army together begins to fray. Sargon's center charges, not in a wild rush but in a controlled advance, shields locked, spears leveled. The Kish line breaks. Not all at once pockets of resistance hold, particularly around Yorzababa's position, but in sections. As units calculate that flight offers better survival odds than continued combat. The Akkadian pursuit is ruthless. Cavalry and chariots run down fleeing soldiers, cutting them down before they can reach the safety of Kish's walls. Yorzababa survives the battle, but cannot survive its aftermath. With his army destroyed, the city's elders open the gates to Sargon. Yorzababa is captured, displayed in humiliation, and then, according to fragmentary texts, executed. Sargon does not take chances with potential rallying points for resistance. The fall of Kish sends a shockwave through Mesopotamia. This is not a traditional Sumerian war of limited aims and negotiated settlements. This is something new, total war, where defeat means not mere tribute, but the erasure of sovereignty. With Kish secured, Sargon turns his attention to the central problem, Lugalzagasi. The hegemon of Umma controls the heartland of Sumer, commands the obedience, however grudging, of Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and other major cities. To defeat Lugalzagasi is to decapitate the Sumerian resistance in a single stroke, but Lugalzagasi is no fool. He recognizes the threat Sargon poses and moves to concentrate his forces. He calls the contingents from his subject cities to Umma, creating an army that may number 20,000 soldiers or more. His strategy is sound: force Sargon to attack prepared defenses, inflict heavy casualties, and demonstrate that Akkadian invincibility is a myth. Sargon faces a dilemma. To lay siege to Umma with Lugalzagasi's army intact inside the city would be suicide. The Akkadians would find themselves trapped between the city garrison and relief forces from other Sumerian cities. But to offer open battle against an enemy with 2-to-1 numerical superiority risks catastrophic defeat. The solution is strategic rather than tactical. Sargon does not march directly on Umma. Instead, he raids the surrounding countryside, burning fields, capturing livestock, and severing the city's supply lines. He knows Lugalzagasi cannot sit idle while his economic base is destroyed. The hegemon must come out and fight or watch his authority evaporate. The provocation works. Lugalzagasi marches his army out of Umma and deploys on a plain where the terrain favors his numerical advantage. The two armies face each other across perhaps a kilometer of open ground. This is the decisive moment. If Sargon loses here, his empire dies before it is born. If Lugal-Zaggisi loses, the Sumerian world fractures. Sargon does not attack immediately. He waits, forcing Lugal-Zaggisi's coalition army to maintain formation under the brutal Mesopotamian sun, forcing them to consume their water supplies, creating the psychological strain that comes from anticipating violence without its release. When the attack comes, it is sudden and multi-layered. Sargon's archers advance to extreme range and begin a systematic bombardment. They do not aim for individual targets but shoot in volleys, creating arrow storms that fall into the densest portions of Lugal-Zaggisi's formation. The Sumerian shields are effective against direct fire, but less so against plunging fire that comes down at steep angles. Casualties mount slowly but steadily. Lugal-Zaggisi orders his own archers forward to counter battery, but Sargon's men are lighter equipped, more mobile. They shoot and displace, refusing to stand and trade volleys. After perhaps an hour of this harassment, gaps appear in the Sumerian line. Units that have suffered disproportionate casualties cannot maintain frontage. Officers try to shuffle men to fill the gaps, but this creates disorder, confusion, vulnerability. Sargon launches his main assault not at the Sumerian center, but at these weakened points. His heavy infantry strikes in column formations, designed to punch through rather than push back. They aim for penetration, for getting behind the Sumerian front line where their enemies cannot bring shields to bear effectively. The tactic succeeds beyond expectation. The Akkadian columns breach the Sumerian line in multiple places. Lugal-Zaggisi tries to restore order, to seal the breaches with his reserves, but the battlefield has descended into chaos. Individual units fight isolated actions without coordination or mutual support. The psychological collapse follows the physical collapse. Sumerian soldiers, unable to see the battle's overall shape, conclude they are surrounded and defeated. The conclusion becomes self-fulfilling as units break and flee. What began as a controlled withdrawal becomes a rout. Lugal-Zaggisi himself is captured, a humiliation of unprecedented magnitude. Sargon does not execute him immediately. Instead, he parades the defeated hegemon through the conquered cities, displaying him in a wooden collar like a common criminal. The message is unmistakable. The old order has ended. The Sumerian system of peer competition between city-states is finished. A new hierarchy exists with Akkad at its apex. The victory over Lugal-Zaggisi does not end the war. The major Sumerian cities remain intact behind their walls, their populations undefeated, their capacity for resistance unbroken. Sargon must now demonstrate that fortifications offer no sanctuary from Akkadian power. Uruk is the most prestigious city in Sumer, home to the legendary Gilgamesh, possessor of walls that are celebrated in poetry and song. If Sargon can take Uruk, no city will believe itself safe. The siege begins with a systematic devastation of the surrounding countryside. Sargon's forces fan out, destroying the irrigation canals that feed Uruk's agricultural hinterland, burning granaries, driving farmers and their families into the city as refugees. The goal is twofold: to deny the city resources and to create overcrowding that strains food supplies and breeds disease. Simultaneously, Sargon establishes a full circumvallation, a ring of fortifications surrounding the city, preventing resupply or escape. This is an enormous engineering effort, requiring thousands of laborers to dig ditches, raise ramparts, and construct palisades. But it is essential. A partial blockade invites attempts to break through. A complete blockade creates the psychological pressure of absolute isolation. Inside Uruk, the situation deteriorates steadily. The granaries that should sustain the population for months are depleted rapidly by the influx of refugees and by the uncertainty about siege duration. Rationing is imposed, but this merely delays the inevitable. After perhaps 3 months, starvation becomes endemic. Sargon escalates the psychological pressure. He offers terms: surrender the city intact, acknowledge Akkadian sovereignty, and the population will be spared. Resist further, and when the walls are breached, as they inevitably will be, every man capable of bearing arms will be executed. The offer divides the city. The Ensi and the temple hierarchy wish to continue resistance. They believe the gods will not permit Uruk to fall, that relief will come from other Sumerian cities, that Sargon will eventually exhaust his resources and withdraw. But the merchant class and the common people calculate differently. They see no relief coming, recognize that each day of resistance brings them closer to death by starvation, and begin to agitate for surrender. The city fractures internally. A faction opposed to the Ensi opens a gate during the night watch, allowing Akkadian forces to enter. The fighting that follows is brief but brutal. Street-to-street combat that ends only when the temple complex is surrounded, and the Ensi has no choice but to capitulate. Sargon's treatment of Uruk establishes the template for subsequent conquests. He does not massacre the population. Mass killing serves no strategic purpose and would only make future cities more desperate in their resistance. Instead, he removes the existing ruling class, installs Akkadian administrators, and extracts a substantial indemnity in silver and grain. The city continues to function, its economy continues to produce, but now the surplus flows to Akkad. With Uruk fallen, the remaining Sumerian cities understand their situation. They cannot defeat Sargon militarily. They cannot outlast him in siege warfare. Their options are submission or destruction. Most choose submission. The Ensi of Yor sends ambassadors to Sargon, acknowledging his sovereignty and offering tribute. Lagash follows suit. Smaller cities, Adab, Shuruppak, Nippur accept Akkadian governors without resistance. But submission is not the end of Sargon's work. He must now consolidate his conquests, transform military occupation into stable imperial rule. This requires the construction of an administrative apparatus capable of extracting resources from conquered territories without provoking rebellion. Sargon's approach is pragmatic. He does not attempt to eradicate Sumerian culture or religion. The temples remain, continue to receive offerings, continue to employ their staffs of priests and scribes. But now the high priesthoods are filled by Akkadian appointees or by Sumerians whose loyalty to Akkad has been secured through marriage alliances, grants of land, or other inducements. The language of administration shifts gradually from Sumerian to Akkadian. Scribes who wish to participate in imperial governance must learn the new language, must adopt Akkadian conventions for record-keeping and correspondence. This linguistic transformation is subtle but profound. Over time, it erodes the distinctiveness of Sumerian identity. Economically, Sargon reorganizes trade to benefit Akkad. He establishes colonies at strategic points, on the Gulf Coast to control maritime trade with the Indus Valley, in the Zagros foothills to control access to Iranian metals, on the upper Euphrates to control trade with Anatolia. These colonies serve both as commercial hubs and as military garrisons, capable of projecting Akkadian power into regions beyond direct conquest. The tax system is rationalized. Instead of each city maintaining its own system of temple-based resource extraction, a uniform imperial taxation scheme is imposed. Fixed percentages of agricultural production, standardized tolls on trade goods, tribute obligations calculated according to population and wealth. These replace the ad hoc arrangements of the Sumerian era. Resistance, when it occurs, is met with exemplary violence. A revolt in the city of Kazalu results in its complete destruction, walls torn down, population dispersed, fields sown with salt to render them infertile. The message is clear: accommodation with Akkadian rule brings prosperity, resistance brings annihilation. By the end of the initial campaign phase, approximately 2330 BCE, Sargon controls all of southern Mesopotamia. The Sumerian city-state system has been replaced by a centralized empire. But the conquest is not complete. To the east lie Elam and the Iranian highlands, potential threats and potential resources. To the west lie the Levantan cities, controlling trade routes to the Mediterranean. To the north lie the Hurrian kingdoms of Upper Mesopotamia. Sargon's ambition will drive him to campaigns in all these directions. But the foundation of empire has been laid in Sumer. With Sumer subdued, Sargon turns his strategic attention eastward, toward Elam. This is not conquest for its own sake. Elam controls the Zagros mountain passes, the routes through which tin, lapis lazuli, and other critical resources flow from the Iranian plateau and beyond. To secure these trade networks is to secure the economic lifeblood of empire. The Elamites are not Mesopotamians. They speak a different language, worship different gods, organized their society around tribal federations rather than city-states. Their military tradition emphasizes mobility and ambush rather than set-piece battle. Their warriors are archers and light infantry, comfortable in the broken terrain of the highlands, adept at harassment and withdrawal. Sargon's campaign in Elam is therefore fundamentally different from his Sumerian conquests. He cannot besiege fortified cities because the Elamites do not concentrate their population in urban centers. He cannot force a decisive battle because Elamite forces refuse to stand and fight. Instead, the campaign becomes a grinding affair of marching columns through mountain valleys, establishing fortified camps and slowly extending Akkadian control over key passes and trade routes. The physical demands are extraordinary. The Akkadian army, built for the flat terrain of Mesopotamia, must adapt to mountain warfare. Supply lines stretch to breaking point as pack animals struggle up steep trails. Water sources are scattered and unreliable. The soldiers, accustomed to heat, now contend with the cold of high altitude, with sudden storms that turn trails into rivers of mud. Sargon's solution is to establish a network of fortified posts at strategic locations: mountain passes, river fords, valley junctions. Each post is garrisoned by Akkadian soldiers supported by local allies recruited from Elamite tribes willing to collaborate. These posts cannot control the entire territory, but they can control movement through it, creating choke points that force trade caravans to pass through Akkadian supervision. The Elamite response is insurgency. Small bands attack supply convoys, ambush isolated garrisons, and then melt back into the mountains before Akkadian forces can respond. This is not a war that can be won through decisive battle. It is a war of attrition, of patience, of gradually demonstrating that resistance is more costly than accommodation. Over the course of several years, the balance shifts. Elamite leaders recognize that Akkadian power is not transient, that Sargon will continue to return with fresh armies no matter how many times he is harassed. One by one, tribal leaders negotiate terms, acknowledge Akkadian overlordship, provide guides and porters for trade caravans, and in return receive Akkadian protection against rival tribes and a share of the trade revenue. The eastern campaigns do not result in the annexation of Elam in any meaningful sense, but they achieve Sargon's objective. The trade routes are secured. The resources flow to Akkad, and the Iranian highlands cease to be a threat to Mesopotamian stability. Sargon's western campaigns are driven by both strategic and symbolic imperatives. The Levantan coast, modern Syria and Lebanon, controls the maritime trade routes to Cyprus, Anatolia, and Egypt. The cedars of Lebanon are prized throughout Mesopotamia for construction and shipbuilding. To control the cedar forests is to control a resource that cannot be sourced elsewhere. And symbolically, to reach the upper sea, the Mediterranean, is to fulfill an ambition that defines universal kingship in Mesopotamian ideology. The campaign begins with a march up the Euphrates Valley, securing a line of communication and supply. The cities along this route, Mari, Tuttle, Ebla, are smaller than their Sumerian counterparts but strategically vital. Sargon does not besiege them. Instead, he offers terms that most find acceptable: acknowledge Akkadian sovereignty, pay moderate tribute, and retain local autonomy. The response varies. Mari submits without resistance, recognizing that its prosperity depends on peaceful trade. Tuttle resists briefly, is besieged, and surrenders after Akkadian forces cut its water supply. Ebla, the greatest power in Syria, mobilizes its army and marches to confront the Akkadians. The Battle of Ebla is significant not for its tactical complexity but for its strategic consequences. The Eblate army, built around chariot forces and heavy infantry, deploys on open ground where its mobility advantage should tell. But Sargon refuses to meet them head-on. Instead, he uses his superior reconnaissance to identify the Eblate supply train, positioned several kilometers behind the battle line. Akkadian light infantry, moving at night, infiltrate the Eblate rear and set fire to the supply wagons. The flames are visible from the Eblate battle line. Panic spreads if the supplies are destroyed. The army cannot sustain itself in the field. The Eblate commander orders a retreat to protect the logistics, and the retreat becomes a rout when Akkadian forces pursue aggressively. Ebla itself falls after a brief siege. Sargon's treatment of the city is harsh but calculated. He does not destroy it, recognizing its value as a commercial hub. But he removes its ruling dynasty, installs an Akkadian governor, and extracts a massive indemnity that cripples Ebla's capacity to challenge Akkadian authority for a generation. With Ebla subdued, the path to the Mediterranean lies open. Sargon's forces march to the coast, reaching the cedar forests of the Lebanese mountains. The local populations, having witnessed the fate of those who resist, offer submission. Sargon establishes colonies, Akkadian settlements, where soldiers are granted land in exchange for continued military service, creating permanent garrisons that secure the region without requiring constant deployments from Akkad. The symbolic achievement is celebrated in inscriptions that Sargon erects throughout his empire. Sargon, king of Akkad, conquered the land from the rising sun to the setting sun. This is hyperbole. His actual control extends from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, but it establishes a conception of empire as encompassing the four quarters of the world, a phrase that will echo through Mesopotamian royal ideology for millennia. While the eastern and western campaigns expand Akkadian power, the northern frontier presents a different challenge. Upper Mesopotamia is inhabited by Hurrian-speaking populations organized into small kingdoms and tribal confederations. These groups do not pose an existential threat to Akkad, but they can raid the northern provinces, disrupt trade, and provide refuge for rebels fleeing Akkadian authority. Sargon's northern strategy is defensive rather than expansionist. He establishes a fortified frontier along the line of the Tigris and Upper Euphrates, building strong points that can serve as bases for punitive expeditions when raids occur. He does not attempt to conquer and hold the Hurrian territories. The logistical burden would be immense and the economic return minimal. Instead, he cultivates client relationships with Hurrian leaders, offering them trade access, military support against rivals, and titles that acknowledge their status within the Akkadian sphere of influence. This costs Akkad little but creates a buffer zone of allied or neutral states that absorb potential threats before they reach Akkadian territory. The northern frontier also becomes a recruitment ground. Hurrian warriors, renowned for their skill with the bow and their mobility, are hired as mercenaries in Akkadian service. This serves dual purposes. It provides Sargon with high-quality troops, and it reduces the number of potential warriors available to raid Akkadian provinces. Military conquest is only the first stage of empire building. Sargon must now create institutions capable of governing territories that span thousands of kilometers, encompass multiple ethnic groups, and lack any tradition of centralized rule. His administrative solution is elegant. At the center is Akkad itself, the capital from which Sargon rules directly. Radiating outward are provincial governors appointed by Sargon who exercise authority over conquered territories. These governors are typically Akkadians or members of Sargon's extended family, individuals whose loyalty is unquestionable. Below the governors are local administrators, often the same individuals who governed under the previous system, but now subordinated to Akkadian authority. This preserves administrative continuity, maintains local knowledge of irrigation systems and tax bases, and reduces resistance by demonstrating that collaboration is rewarded. We must therefore reconstruct the toll through inference and comparison. The Battle of Ummah, where Lugal-Zaygesi's coalition was destroyed, likely resulted in casualties in the thousands. Ancient battles were remarkably lethal once formations broke. Fleeing soldiers, unable to defend themselves effectively, were cut down in wholesale numbers. A reasonable estimate would place Sumerian dead at perhaps 5,000 to 7,000, with an equivalent number wounded or captured. But battlefield casualties represent only a fraction of the total cost. The sieges inflicted far greater suffering. Uruk, under blockade for 3 months or more, experienced widespread starvation. Contemporary Mesopotamian texts describe the horrors of siege-induced famine, the consumption of animals normally considered unclean, the breakdown of social bonds as families compete for scarce resources, the epidemic diseases that flourish in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. The death toll from sieges was primarily among the very young and the very old, those least able to survive on reduced rations. A city of 40,000 might lose 10% of its population during a prolonged siege, not from direct combat but from starvation and disease. The countryside suffered as well. Sargon's forces systematically destroyed the agricultural infrastructure of regions that resisted. Irrigation canals were breached, flooding fields and rendering them uncultivable for years. Granaries were burned, eliminating seed stock for future planting. Orchards, date palms, fig trees were cut down, a particularly devastating tactic since these trees require decades to mature and represent multi-generational investments. The cumulative effect of these agricultural destructions was famine that extended beyond the immediate war zone. Mesopotamian cities depended on agricultural surpluses from their hinterlands. When those surpluses disappeared, urban populations had no reserve. Famine in the countryside became famine in the cities, compounding the casualties from direct military action. Modern scholarship estimates that the population of southern Mesopotamia may have declined by 15 to 20% during Sargon's conquests. This represents not merely battlefield dead, but the accumulated toll of siege, famine, disease, and displacement. Some of this population loss was temporary refugees who fled to regions beyond Akkadian control but eventually returned, but much was permanent. The military and demographic costs are measurable, if imprecisely. The cultural cost is more subtle but no less profound. Sargon's conquests mark the end of Sumerian political independence. Never again will the cities of Sumer function as sovereign entities, free to make war and peace, to choose their own rulers, to determine their own destinies. This is not cultural genocide. Sumerian language continues to be written and spoken. Sumerian literature continues to be composed and copied. Sumerian gods continue to be worshipped in their traditional temples, but the context has changed fundamentally. Sumerian culture now exists within an Akkadian political framework. The patronage that sustains scribes and priests comes from Akkadian rulers. The audience for Sumerian literature increasingly consists of Akkadians learning Sumerian as a classical language rather than native speakers. We must therefore reconstruct the toll through inference and comparison. The Battle of Ummah, where Lugal-Zaygesi's coalition was destroyed, likely resulted in casualties in the thousands. Ancient battles were remarkably lethal once formations broke. Fleeing soldiers, unable to defend themselves effectively, were cut down in wholesale numbers. A reasonable estimate would place Sumerian dead at perhaps 5,000 to 7,000, with an equivalent number wounded or captured. But battlefield casualties represent only a fraction of the total cost. The sieges inflicted far greater suffering. Uruk, under blockade for 3 months or more, experienced widespread starvation. Contemporary Mesopotamian texts describe the horrors of siege-induced famine, the consumption of animals normally considered unclean, the breakdown of social bonds as families compete for scarce resources, the epidemic diseases that flourish in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. The death toll from sieges was primarily among the very young and the very old, those least able to survive on reduced rations. A city of 40,000 might lose 10% of its population during a prolonged siege, not from direct combat but from starvation and disease. The countryside suffered as well. Sargon's forces systematically destroyed the agricultural infrastructure of regions that resisted. Irrigation canals were breached, flooding fields and rendering them uncultivable for years. Granaries were burned, eliminating seed stock for future planting. Orchards, date palms, fig trees were cut down, a particularly devastating tactic since these trees require decades to mature and represent multi-generational investments. The cumulative effect of these agricultural destructions was famine that extended beyond the immediate war zone. Mesopotamian cities depended on agricultural surpluses from their hinterlands. When those surpluses disappeared, urban populations had no reserve. Modern scholarship estimates that the population of southern Mesopotamia may have declined by 15 to 20% during Sargon's conquests. This represents not merely battlefield dead, but the accumulated toll of siege, famine, disease, and displacement. Some of this population loss was temporary refugees who fled to regions beyond Akkadian control but eventually returned, but much was permanent. The cultural cost is more subtle but no less profound. Sargon's conquests marked the end of Sumerian political independence. Over time, this subordination transforms Sumerian identity. The language gradually shifts from a living vernacular to a liturgical and scholarly tongue, similar to Latin in medieval Europe. By the end of the second millennium BCE, perhaps 6 or 7 centuries after Sargon, Sumerian will be a dead language, preserved only in temple schools and royal archives. The psychological impact on the Sumerian elite must have been profound. These were people who believed their cities had been ordained by the gods at the creation of the world, that the cosmic order required the independence of Yor, Uruk, and Lagash. Sargon's victory demolished these assumptions. If the gods permitted Sumerian subjugation, then either the gods were not as powerful as believed, or they had abandoned their people, or the entire theological framework that justified Sumerian civilization was mistaken. We see echoes of this psychological crisis in Sumerian literature composed in the centuries after Sargon. The Lamentations, poetic texts mourning the destruction of cities, express not merely grief, but metaphysical confusion. How could the gods allow such catastrophe? What did it mean for the cosmic order? These are not merely rhetorical questions. They represent genuine attempts to reconcile traditional beliefs with the new reality of imperial subjugation. Sargon's conquests imposed costs on the Akkadians as well. The military establishment required to maintain empire is expensive. Professional soldiers must be paid, equipped, and fed. Garrisons must be maintained in dozens of cities across hundreds of kilometers. The logistical apparatus must be sustained even in peacetime. The financial burden is met through taxation and tribute, but this creates resentment among the taxed populations. Akkadian citizens who benefit from imperial trade and prestige find themselves bearing ever-increasing tax obligations to fund military campaigns that enrich the royal household, but not necessarily the common people. Military service exacts its own toll. Akkadian soldiers spend years away from their families, endure the physical hardships of campaign, and face the ever-present risk of violent death. The casualty rates among Akkadian forces are not recorded, but basic military arithmetic suggests they are substantial. Sargon's army of perhaps 10,000 cannot lose more than a fraction of its strength in any given campaign without becoming ineffective. But even modest casualties 5% per campaign accumulate across multiple campaigns into significant losses. The social fabric of Akkad is transformed by empire. A society that had been relatively egalitarian, where status derived from agricultural productivity and religious office, becomes militarized and hierarchical. Warriors enjoy elevated status and preferential access to resources. Merchants who facilitate imperial trade accumulate wealth that dwarfs traditional agricultural riches. The temple hierarchies, once the primary holders of social power, find themselves subordinated to royal authority. These transformations create winners and losers within Akkadian society. The elite military commanders, royal administrators, merchants engaged in long-distance trade accumulate wealth and power. The peasantry, whose agricultural surplus is extracted to fund imperial ambitions, see their living standards stagnate or decline. Social tensions increase, though they remain largely suppressed during Sargon's lifetime by the legitimacy that military success confers. Even at the height of Sargon's power, the empire contains structural vulnerabilities that will eventually contribute to its collapse. The first is the problem of succession. Sargon's authority is personal, built on his military success and his charisma. There is no established mechanism for transferring imperial power. When Sargon dies, his sons will fight for succession, fragmenting the empire and inviting rebellion from subject populations who see an opportunity to regain independence. The second vulnerability is economic. The empire depends on trade, revenue taxes on goods moving through Akkadian-controlled routes, tribute from subject cities. This revenue is vulnerable to disruption. If trade routes are severed by external enemies or internal rebellion, the financial foundation of empire crumbles. Without revenue, Sargon cannot pay his soldiers. Without soldiers, he cannot enforce control. The system is robust during times of expansion, when plunder from conquered territories supplements trade revenue, but fragile during times of stasis or contraction. The third vulnerability is ethnic tension. The Akkadian Empire is history's first multi-ethnic state, but it has no ideology of multiculturalism or equality. Akkadians rule, others obey. This creates resentment that remains dormant during periods of strong central authority, but erupts during periods of weakness. Subject populations do not identify as Akkadians. They identify as Sumerians, Elamites, Syrians who happen to be ruled by Akkad. Given opportunity, they will attempt to restore their independence. The fourth vulnerability is logistical. The empire's size creates communication delays that allow local governors to accumulate autonomous power. A crisis on the eastern frontier might take weeks to be reported to Akkad, and the dispatch of reinforcements might take weeks more. In the interval, the local governor must make decisions that effectively determine imperial policy. Over time, this autonomy can transform into independence, as governors conclude that their interests are better served by rebellion than continued loyalty. These vulnerabilities do not manifest during Sargon's lifetime. His military success, his administrative skill, and his personal authority are sufficient to hold the empire together. But they are structural features of the system he creates, time bombs that will detonate under his successes. Behind the grand narrative of conquest lie individual human stories, most of which are lost to history, but whose outlines we can sketch. Consider the Akkadian soldier who survived Sargon's campaigns. He has spent perhaps 10 years under arms, marched thousands of kilometers, fought in a dozen battles, witnessed horrors that will haunt him for the remainder of his life. When he is finally discharged, he returns to Akkad with a modest grant of land compensation for his service, but he no longer fits into civilian society. The skills that made him an effective soldier, violence, obedience, endurance of hardship, are not assets in peacetime. He is a stranger in his own city. Consider the Sumerian refugee, a woman from Uruk whose husband died in the siege, whose children succumbed to starvation, who fled south to your seeking safety. She finds herself in a city that can barely feed its own population, let alone refugees. She survives through begging, through prostitution, through whatever means present themselves. She does not appear in Sargon's victory inscriptions, but her suffering is as much a consequence of his conquests as any battlefield casualty. Consider the Akkadian administrator, appointed as governor of a conquered Sumerian city. He arrived believing in the righteousness of Akkadian rule in the civilizing mission of empire. But daily governance requires compromises, cruelties, decisions that erode his initial idealism. He orders punitive executions to suppress dissent, extracts taxes from populations already near starvation, collaborates with local elites whose venality he despises but whose cooperation he requires. He becomes complicit in a system whose injustices he can no longer ignore but feels powerless to reform. These individual stories, multiplied by tens of thousands, constitute the human cost of Sargon's achievement. They do not diminish his historical significance. Empire building is never bloodless, but they provide necessary context for evaluating the legacy of conquest. Sargon's conquests represent a watershed in military history. Before Sargon, Mesopotamian warfare was constrained by tradition, limited in scope, and conducted between roughly equivalent opponents. Sargon transforms warfare into an instrument of strategic ambition, capable of achieving political objectives that previous generations would have considered impossible. His tactical innovations, while incremental rather than revolutionary, are nonetheless significant. The integration of multiple combat arms, heavy infantry, light infantry, archers, chariots into a coordinated fighting force allows Sargon to adapt to varied tactical situations. Against Sumerian heavy infantry, he uses missile troops and flanking maneuvers. Against Elamite light forces, he uses his own mobility to force engagements on favorable terms. Against fortified cities, he combines blockade, psychological pressure, and when necessary, storming operations. More important than specific tactics is Sargon's operational art, his ability to plan and execute campaigns that achieve strategic objectives rather than merely winning individual battles. He understands that defeating an enemy army is not an end in itself, but a means to the larger goal of political subjugation. He therefore pursues defeated enemies relentlessly, seeks to eliminate their capacity to reconstitute forces, and follows battlefield victory with immediate exploitation that prevents enemies from recovering. His logistical capabilities enable sustained operations over unprecedented distances and durations. Previous Mesopotamian campaigns were typically seasonal affairs, armies mobilized after harvest, campaigned for a few months, and dispersed before the next agricultural season. Sargon's professional army operates year-round, sustained by a sophisticated supply system that prepositions resources along march routes and establishes forward bases for extended operations. His intelligence and reconnaissance systems give him information superiority over opponents who rely on traditional methods. Sargon employs scouts, cultivates informants in enemy cities, and interrogates prisoners systematically to develop detailed understanding of enemy capabilities and intentions. This allows him to make decisions based on accurate information rather than assumption. The cumulative effect of these innovations is a military instrument qualitatively superior to anything that preceded it. Sargon's enemies possess equivalent technology bronze weapons, chariots, professional infantry, but they lack the organizational sophistication, the operational doctrine, and the logistical depth that allows Sargon to translate tactical victories into strategic conquest. Sargon's most enduring achievement is not military but political, the creation of empire as an institutional form. Previous conquerors Lugalzagesi most notably had established personal hegemonies, where multiple cities acknowledged a single ruler's supremacy. But these arrangements were personal rather than institutional, dependent on the conqueror's continued military success and vulnerable to collapse upon his death. Sargon creates something different, an administrative structure that transcends individual personality, that persists through succession crises, that homogenizes diverse populations into a single political community. His innovations include hierarchical administration with clear chains of command from the capital to provincial governors to local officials. This allows central authority to penetrate to the lowest levels of society, extracting resources and enforcing compliance. Standardization of weights, measures, language, and legal codes. This reduces transaction costs, facilitates trade, and creates a sense of common identity among populations that previously saw themselves as fundamentally different. Professional bureaucracy staffed by literate administrators who serve the state rather than local elites. These bureaucrats owe their positions to royal appointment rather than hereditary right, creating loyalty to the imperial system. Standing military forces garrisoned throughout the empire, capable of suppressing local resistance without requiring mobilization from the capital. This makes imperial control more efficient and more durable. Economic integration through protected trade routes, uniform taxation, and imperial monopolies on critical resources. This creates material incentives for collaboration with the imperial system. These innovations will be copied and refined by every subsequent empire in the ancient Near East, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, and eventually the Hellenistic kingdoms and Rome. Sargon establishes the template. Sargon's conquests require an ideological justification that transcends traditional Mesopotamian political theology. The city-state system was legitimized through the belief that each city belonged to a particular god, that the NC ruled as the god's earthly representative, and that conflicts between cities reflected divine politics. This theology cannot justify empire, which requires subordinating multiple gods to a single royal authority. He claims that the great gods, particularly Enlil, the king of the gods, have granted him dominion over the four quarters of the world. This is not merely rhetorical flourish. It represents a fundamental reconception of political legitimacy. This ideology is propagated through inscriptions placed in temples throughout the empire, through royal titles that emphasize universal dominion, and through religious rituals that position Sargon as the intermediary between humanity and the divine realm. His daughter Enheduanna, installed as high priestess at Ur, composes hymns that celebrate Sargon as the agent of cosmic order, the king through whom the gods manifest their will on earth. This ideological innovation proves remarkably durable. Every subsequent Mesopotamian empire will adopt variants of it, claiming that their ruler has been chosen by the gods to impose order on chaos, to unite the fractured world under legitimate authority. Any assessment of Sargon's achievement must reckon with its costs. This violence is not incidental. It is central to the imperial project. Nor is Sargon's empire a benign hegemon that brings order and prosperity to grateful subjects. Trade revenue that once enriched Syrian merchants now fills Akkadian treasuries. Resistance to Akkadian rule is endemic, if not always visible, in surviving sources. Cities that submit during Sargon's lifetime rebel under his successors. Provinces that appear pacified harbor populations that resent foreign rule and await opportunities to overthrow it. The imperial system requires constant vigilance and periodic applications of force to maintain control. Moreover, the empire creates winners and losers within Akkadian society. The military elite and the merchant class benefit enormously. The peasantry, whose agricultural surplus funds imperial ambitions, does not. Social inequality increases, though this is masked during Sargon's lifetime by the plunder flowing from conquered territories. When we assess Sargon's conquests from the perspective of 3,000 years historical distance, certain patterns emerge that will recur throughout the history of empire. First, the pattern of rapid military expansion followed by slow administrative consolidation. Sargon conquers most of his empire within a decade. It will take generations for Akkadian rule to become normalized, for subject populations to accept their subordination, for the institutions of empire to become robust enough to survive succession crises. Second, the pattern of military superiority translating into political dominance, but only temporarily. Sargon's military innovations give Akkad decisive advantage over its contemporaries, but enemies learn, adapt, and eventually develop countermeasures. The military basis of Akkadian power erodes over time, requiring ever greater investment to maintain the same level of dominance. Third, the pattern of cultural blending. Sargon is a Semitic conqueror of Sumerian cities, but over time Akkadian culture absorbs substantial Sumerian elements. The Akkadians adopt Sumerian cuneiform writing, appropriate Sumerian religious concepts, and incorporate Sumerian literary traditions. Empire creates hybrid cultures that are neither purely conqueror nor purely conquered, but something new. Fourth, the pattern of imperial overstretch. Sargon's empire extends from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, from the Zagros Mountains to the Syrian desert. This is close to the maximum extent that can be governed with Bronze Age transportation and communication technology. Attempts to expand further encounter diminishing returns. The cost of projecting power increases exponentially with distance, while the resources available for extraction in frontier territories are often minimal. Fifth, the pattern of dynastic fragility. Sargon establishes an empire, but he cannot guarantee its perpetuation. His successors face challenges he did not. They lack his personal charisma. They inherit rather than conquer their authority. They must manage an established empire rather than build one. The succession crises that follow Sargon's death nearly destroy what he created. Sargon of Akkad creates the world's first multi-ethnic empire. This is not merely a quantitative change, more territory, more subjects, but a qualitative transformation of political organization. Before Sargon, human societies were organized primarily at the city-state or tribal level. After Sargon, empire becomes a permanent possibility, a form of political organization that will dominate large portions of human history for the next 3 millennia. His military achievements are impressive: the defeat of Lugal-Sagassi, the conquest of Sumer, the campaigns to the Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf. But his administrative and ideological achievements are more significant. He creates institutions that can govern diverse populations across vast distances. He develops an ideology that justifies imperial rule. He establishes patterns of centralized bureaucracy, standardized administration, and cultural integration that will be replicated by countless subsequent empires. The cost of this achievement is enormous. Tens of thousands dead in battle and siege, entire regions devastated, ancient political traditions destroyed, populations displaced and subjugated. Whether the benefits increased trade, reduced intercity warfare, cultural exchange justify these costs is a judgment that each generation must make according to its own values. What is not debatable is Sargon's historical significance. He stands at a hinge point in history, a moment when one form of political organization gives way to another. The city-state system that had organized Mesopotamian civilization for a millennium is replaced by empire. The world after Sargon is fundamentally different from the world before him. In this sense, his conquests are not merely military campaigns, but acts of political creation that reshape the trajectory of civilization. The Akkadian Empire will not last within a century of Sargon's death. It will collapse under the pressure of internal rebellion and external invasion. But the idea of empire survives. Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Macedon, Rome each will build on the foundations Sargon lays. The pattern of centralized bureaucracy extracting resources from diverse subject populations, of military force maintaining order across vast distances, of cultural homogenization creating common identity, all of these trace their lineage to Akkad. When we stand on the battlefield at Umma, where Lugalza-Jizi's coalition shattered against Akkadian discipline, we stand at one of history's great turning points. Here, the old order died. Here, a new form of human organization was born in violence and ambition. Here, a cupbearer from an obscure city remade the world. The conquest of Sargon is complete. The age of empire has begun. The Akkadian achievement, military, administrative, ideological, will echo through millennia, shaping how humans organize themselves into political communities, how they understand authority and legitimacy, how they build and sustain power across space and time. This is the legacy of the First War of Empire, the enduring monument to Sargon's brutal and transformative vision.